I was just interrupted by an announcement, but anyway, it's only now with the war in Ukraine that global attention has shifted to this new crisis and its global consequences. But in the fall of 2020, before anyone had heard of Wuhan and the coronavirus, the world was gripped in a social unrest that was unprecedented in our lifetimes. It was a groundswell of global protests that was felt from Asia to South America. And it's easy now to forget how intense this period was, but it was really something quite unprecedented, certainly in my lifetime. There was a demand for system change that was shaking governments in France, in Hong Kong, in Thailand, in Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, Ecuador, Chile, Honduras, Haiti, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and the list was growing. Mass protests in Chile forced the government to hold a constitutional assembly to change provisions in the Constitution that had been placed there by the dictatorship of Pinochet. Pro-capital, pro-neoliberal policies were now being questioned, and the process is underway as I speak in Chile to remove those pro-neoliberal policies from the Chilean Constitution. And so this was a phenomenon that was taking place globally. The United States exploded in a wave of protests that had not been seen since the days of the Civil Rights Movement. The police killing of George Floyd marked a flashpoint where popular disgust over racism was transfigured into a protest, a mass protest over the political system itself. And then January 6th happened. That event defined an epoch, not just for the United States, but the world as well. It also represented a movement for radical social change. It's the darker side of a polarization process that is splitting societies the world over. And at its heart is the shifting role of the state and its relation to an economic system that has also lost legitimacy for large portions of the world's population. So the ships of state that have offered direction and refuge in times of crisis are themselves in turmoil. They are rudderless and seemingly helpless to address the fears that are radicalizing populations the world over. So from the destruction of social safety nets to rising inequality and global warming, governments have been failing to provide the kind of leadership or direction that could meet such global threats head on. So if the legitimacy of the state rests on its duty to protect the welfare, the collective welfare of its citizens, the betrayal of this responsibility amounts to what I call treason of the state. And this is something I deal with at length in Civilizing the State. So disillusion with the state as the guardian of public welfare is deepening. This vacuum of state leadership has led to a resurgence of the right and demands for radical reforms on the left. These are the twin forces unleashed by a global capitalist imperium that has set the world on a course to extinction. The empire of capital has split the world into two great and opposing forces, the upper world of wealth and global civil society. But the struggle for change extends far beyond politics and economics. The anguished calls for reform are not merely for changes of policy or political direction. They are the birth spasms of a new system of values and a vision of human community that are struggling to be born. The globalization of capitalism has not only engendered injustices that are mobilizing populations to resist. The projection of human power and greed on a global scale has ruptured the balance between humanity and the world's life systems. Ecosystem collapse is demanding a level of global response that is unprecedented. So change in our time means transformation. While right-wing populism appeals to the authoritarian tropes of the past, the struggle to fashion a real alternative to the status quo entails a different and far more challenging path forward. A fully sovereign and transfigured civil society from local neighborhood to global stage is at the heart of this vision. The scope of the change that is needed is profound. A transformative vision that is equal to the challenges we now face as a species is not merely an accumulation of incremental steps within the current setup. It is to understand and to relate to the world in an entirely different way and to fashion a political order that reclaims and elevates those attributes in us that have always been the foundation of humane societies. Cooperation and the bonds that unite us with each other and with the natural world are essential to this vision. The task of politics now is to make such a vision manifest. And the task of social movements is to create political structures that are capable of doing so. The underlying hypothesis in Civilizing the State is that a deepening of democracy and cooperation for the common good are the only means by which the changes we seek might be realized. Contrary to the extreme individualism and self-interest that sustains the capitalist worldview, the common good proposes an alternative framework for our political aims and a pathway through the crisis of legitimacy that imperils democracy itself. But these tendencies, cooperation for common benefit and competition for self-interest, are embedded in every human society. How societies handle these contending forces will determine the future that lies in store for people and planet alike. But the values inherent in civilizing the state also deal with issues of spiritual renewal. Cooperation and the common good are both the manifestation and the means by which a transformative vision of human community and human consciousness is made real. Civilizing the state is an extended reflection on what a very particular set of beliefs and values discloses when they are taken seriously as a foundation for a new political order. But even saying this brings up a basic question. Is system change possible, or have things simply gone too far? We are living through a crucible moment. There is a feeling of futility in the air, that nothing we do will make a difference. This despair is fed by a tunnel vision of the world in which alternative paradigms for a way of living are absent. The totalitarian vision of capitalism dismisses the possibility of all other worldviews. It has disabled our imaginations, and understanding how other societies have taken hold of their futures and revolutionized their forms of collective life has never been more important. Those who dreamt and fought for the ideals of democracy, liberty, and equality in the time of monarchs were indispensable precisely because their hopes seemed so distant to their times. They were torchbearers. They called upon values in the human condition that are innate in all people and in all societies. The same values are alive today. It is precisely their violation that is fueling the rage and resentment that we are witnessing all around us. The task before us is to take up these same values and to invest them with the power and the means to remake the world in their image. What is this image? What does the notion of a cooperative civil economy mean in our times? How does it address the multiple crises, economic, environmental, social, political, and spiritual, that have converged in ways that are probably unprecedented in human history? We must begin with politics, and more precisely, the role that cooperation and civil society must play in this process. The concept of the partner state, which I will go into in more detail, derives directly from this. There's a clear sense in which the attributes we ascribe to civil society, political autonomy, plurality, common interest, participation and voluntary association, also define essential qualities of democracy itself. In key ways, civil society has inherited the virtues that were vested in the political institutions of the liberal state. This is fundamentally a shift in the dynamics of political legitimacy. The established forms of representative democracy are leaving citizens feeling powerless, frustrated, and ineffectual. Populism and civil power are being mobilized against this established order. But civil power is a sword that cuts two ways. For many progressives, civil society is a repository of all that is lacking in the state, all the good stuff of a democracy. But does this positive image hold up? Or is it merely a projection of our own frustrated desires? The Ku Klux Klan is also a face of civil society, but one we prefer not to look at. The upsurge of right-wing populism is also a product of civil society. It forms a counterpoint to the kinds of civil mobilization that progressives identify with. So if marches for civil rights or the environment signify one set of values, populist movements to block immigration or to build border walls or to attack Congress signify something very different. What is taking place in the United States today is a stark reminder of how civil societies collapse when political institutions are incapable of regenerating fundamental civil values or maintaining the ideology of the political order. This reflects the collapse of what Gramsci called the cultural hegemony of the state. This is the political ideology or the common sense of what politics and state are about, gradually eroding and leaving behind the trust of the citizens in that political system. So this reflects the collapse, as I said, of the cultural hegemony of neoliberal states. Ultimately, what concerns us is the balance of forces that trend the evolution of societies toward one disposition, that of cooperation and common benefit, as opposed to another of toxic individualism, competitiveness, and so on. This is not to say that cooperation and mutual benefit are always positive. Fascism is an example of a particular type of cooperation and social bonding. And in his book, The Civic Foundations of Fascism, Dylan Riley describes how the rise of fascism in Europe depended on the existence of vibrant civil societies and the support of civil associations. Civil society was a source of both the impulse toward democratic freedoms and the drive to authoritarianism. Fascism arose when these freedoms were betrayed by the failure of liberal political institutions to offer a political vision and a vehicle for their realization. Fascism, like Marxism, embodies the old idea that civil society and the institutions of the state are one and the same. Both ideologies propose the consummation of human histories to be found in the perfection of the state as a kind of superego. Marx's notion of the withering away of the state ultimately entails the dissolution of civil society into a classless, unitary community where politics and power also cease. So fascism and Marxism wish to dispense with politics altogether. Many of the popular movements we witness today have the same view, that politics does not work, that liberal institutions are failing, and that the answer may lie in scrapping politics as the route to social change. They are susceptible to the authoritarian impulses of sociopaths like Trump or a butcher like Bolsonaro. So this disenchantment with politics infects both the left and the right. It is present in the rejection of representative democracy by neo-anarchists extolling leaderless movements, as well as the apocalyptic fears of right-wing militias arming themselves against the schemes of their own governments. In fact, the real issue before us is not that politics has failed, but that politics has effectively stopped. Globalization has rendered politics meaningless because the power of financial and corporate interests has created a scenario in which nation states are impotent to act in any way that contravenes the interests of these powers. Or, as Zygmunt Bauman has put it, the nation state is full of politics, but increasingly devoid of power. Given all of this, how do we visualize a way forward? In Civilizing the State, my aim was to explore what a new form of political economy might look like in practice. Not in some hypothetical future utopia, but in the real world here and now. I hoped these examples could provide lessons for an alternative that addresses the questions of inequality, disempowerment, and governmental neglect that have fueled the crisis of legitimacy in the political chaos that is unfolding around us. In all of these cases, whether we are speaking of the grassroots municipalism of Barcelona or deep democracy in Kerala or the stateless democracy of Rojava, all of which I explore in Civilizing the State, the foundation stones on which a new political economy is being built are cooperation, pluralism, economic democracy, inclusivity, environmentalism, and a highly mobilized and organized civil society taking responsibility for collective governance. So what I'd like to do is share with you some slides around the, hold on a second here. Yes, to share with you some slides around the case studies that I explore in Civilizing the State. Bologna and the Bologna Protocol is one example of how a local municipality is reinventing its relationship with civil society in that city. Bologna's, I'm just going to sort of minimize this if I can. Bologna's Urban Commons Initiative began in 2014 when the City Council passed the Bologna Regolamento, or the protocol for the care and registration and regeneration of urban commons. City officials worked with LabGov, which is a nonprofit organization, promoting this new form of collaboration and symbiotic sort of governance between municipalities and civil society. And this requires a cultural change in the administration of public and private goods, and implies a shift from government logic centered on the bipolar paradigm of the state on the one hand and the civil society on the other, to governance logic and mechanisms for governmental society to co-manage the work. The Bologna Protocol addresses the gap between civil society and the municipal administration around the co-management of common spaces and common resources. So the regulation on cooperation between citizens and government on the care and regeneration of urban commons is a framework for the joint care and management of urban commons. And the underlying principles of the regulation include recognition of commons as essential to the generation of individual and collective well-being, mutual trust between the municipality and the civil groups engaged in its work, the autonomy of citizens to engage in the pursuit of common aims, flexibility and informality of arrangements for the co-management of resources, openness, accountability, and transparency in the co-management of commons, and crucially, the promotion of social economy organizations as a priority for the production and preservation of common goods and services. So this Co-Cities protocol pioneered in Bologna, was the basis for a framework and a structure for a new form of collaboration around the co-management and co-creation of commons by more than 150 cities around the world. So this co-city idea is based on collaborative and polycentric governance of a variety of urban, physical, environmental, cultural, knowledge, and digital resources, which are managed or co-owned through a contractual or institutionalized public, community, or public-private form of community partnership. And so far, over 400 collaboration pacts have been generated as a result of this regulation. Now, when we're talking about a crisis of legitimacy and the loss of trust between civil societies and their governments, the task, I think, before us, and what I'm trying to explore through these examples, is how a new form of relationship can be established between civil societies and their institutions of governance. And the result of this is something that I term the partner state, which is a very different kind of relationship between the institutions of state and the organizations of civil society. The other example I wanted to highlight at a kind of a larger scale, a state scale of administration, is the deep democracy of Kerala. So Kerala is a state that has been governed largely by socialist or communist administrations. The first communist administration actually elected in the West was in 1957 in the state of Kerala. What happened during this period was a massive organizing drive on the part of pro-democracy and socialist movements in the state, focusing on land reform, on literacy, on universal public education, health and social care, and aligning all of these with an effort to address caste discrimination and anti-colonial struggles. So the reform process that began actually in the late 1800s and 1900s, but continued right through the formation of state governments in India, reached far beyond individual policies or programs. It included a determined effort to deepen democracy within the decision-making structures of the state itself. And one of the areas that this took place, or one of the means by which this took place in Kerala was, and there's just some images, just getting a sense of the place, but was in the organization of a citizens' planning process in which the whole of Kerala society was drawn into the planning of decentralized government services and mobilizing citizens at local, regional, and the entire state level to plan together with the state how planning both around social and economic development could take place. And Kerala is a place today that is one of the most cooperative jurisdictions in India. There's almost 12,000 cooperatives that are organized in Kerala. And while the state itself has less than 3% of India's population, it accounts for 70% of India's cooperative membership. So cooperatives are a key instrument for implementing a policy of democratic, economic, and social development in Kerala. And it is the decentralization process that was initiated in the People's Campaign for Decentralized Planning that, in a sense, brought all of these factors together to conceptualize and implement a new way of co-governing, planning, and development work in Kerala. So institutional change in Kerala required not only radical changes in how the institutions of government operated, but also changes in how people behaved. And so the end goal of this process was a deepening of deliberative democracy in a new synergy between state and civil society. Special attention was devoted to the most marginalized people in society: women, the lowest castes, and the scheduled tribes. And here there are images of the kind of local discussions at the panchayat level, at the local sort of village council level, that participated in a statewide process of decentralization and collective civil and community-based planning. Now, one of the things that came out of this process was an effort on the part of the regional government or the state government in Kerala to strengthen cooperative organizations, and through these organizations to empower specific groups of people into becoming more active and productive members of their communities and the local economies. And Kudumbashree was one such example among many. It was set up in 1997 by the state government. Its formation was in a context of developing or devolving the powers of the panchayat, village councils in Kerala, and through the People's Plan campaign. So this is basically an effort to mobilize women in Kerala and focus on eradicating poverty and promoting women's employment with cultivation of fallow land, training, and the promotion of microenterprises. This program helped create over 70,000 collective farms, bringing over 10 million acres into cultivation from unused or barren land in Kerala. Over 250,000 women are now cultivating land in common as a result of this program. So Kudumbashree, the mobilization of women through cooperative organizations situated and organized at local, regional, and state levels, the production of microenterprises to promote local economic development, the bringing into cultivation of previously barren or fallow land were all key elements of Kerala's plan to mobilize and enable and empower civil society around development issues. I want to highlight the point that the transition to modernity from a feudal system in Kerala was not a product of capitalist development as envisioned in the Western model of industrialization, nor on the centralized planning rule of the state as decreed in the conventional socialist archetype. It was a product of radical democratizing pressures from below and the formation of state policies that responded positively to these pressures. In the process, ideas concerning the state, the role of government, and the act of governing were profoundly changed. Effectively, what we had is a prototype of a new conception of state and its relation to civil society, and it is this element that is what I describe as the partner state. The last example I want to share around a partner state paradigm is the question of Rojava in northeast Syria. These are images of what are sort of mostly associated with Syria, is the war, the destruction, and the role of ISIS and the very many proxy interests that are embroiled in this 12-year-old war. But this is not all that is happening in Rojava. The revolution that is taking place in Rojava is a unique movement of experimentation and hope, and it is an example of a transformative political economy in really the most unlikely of places. Rojava is the yellow quadrant of northeast Syria. It's actually the West Kurdistan, which extends through Iraq and Turkey and Iran. But what is happening in Rojava is really a template for a new form of stateless democracy that I believe holds a lot of the principles and the values that we need to be considering when we're thinking about a new form of political economy. It's a population of 40 million. We're talking about the Kurds in northeast Syria here. The population of 40 million, the Kurds are the world's largest ethnic group without a state. And throughout their history, the Kurdish people have always resisted centralized political control. And now with the retreat of the Assad forces from northeast Syria, they have established a form of communitarian, decentralized democracy with cooperatives as the foundation model for the economy. What they are experimenting with is a form of stateless democracy they call democratic confederalism. It's based on the principle of direct democracy as the organizing basis for both economics and politics. And the foundation of this is communal control of both economic and political life. So it's an instance of community-directed democracy acting as a link between the organization of the economy and the organization of political life as an integrated system. How does this system work? It is basically a rejection of the nation state as inherently oppressive. It's direct democracy based on communal councils, federated in autonomous self-governing territories, the inclusivity of all religious and ethnic groups, gender equality, cooperative economics, participatory politics, and environmentalism. So here is an example of a meeting of the local commune, which forms the foundation of the council system in Rojava. And so just to give you a sort of a pictorial of this, you have the communes based in local communities and neighborhoods. They each have a series of committees that run a number of issue areas in the local community, from youth involvement, for women's work organization, defense, and so on. The neighborhood councils, which the communes forms, then become the next level of organization up. And then the next level up from that is the neighborhood councils being represented in county councils through a federated structure of representative individuals from the levels below. And then finally, these various regions of the territory, which again relate to the neighborhood councils and the communists at the local level. So what you have is a means by which civil society addresses collective issues at the neighborhood level, at the local, regional, and district levels. Cooperatives of the organizational form used to put collective solutions into practice, and currently there are over 200 cooperatives in Rojava. It's an integrated approach, territorial, community-driven development, cooperative economic democracy, and democratic self-government, communal direct democracy. All three of these methodologies are integrated within a single comprehensive vision of systemic change. And so the model here is civil organizations directing development. So the lessons here are that, first, comprehensive, large-scale cooperative political economy is possible. Integrating economic with political democracy within a single system is crucial. Systems building occur from the grassroots upwards. The vital role of organized civil institutions that take the leadership and participate directly in the co-management of policy, economic and social development, plural and multi-interest institutions that include all the religious and ethnic groupings in the region, a clear social, cultural, economic, and political vision, and comprehensive education and training, which is both communal, political, and institutional. For this to survive, of course, there's a need for international solidarity, and this is something that Rojava has been working very hard to accomplish through its international alliances. The other example of stateless democracy is Chiapas and the Zapatista revolution in Mexico, but I will not go into that now as I don't have time. So I am just to complete this talk, this presentation. I'm just going to go back to my script here. And I believe I have, how much time do I have left, folks?
We have about 15 minutes left in the session, John. So if
Okay.
you leave 10 minutes for questions, that would be great. If you want to
Yes.
say a few more words, that should be fine.
Okay. So I'll just close this off. The examples of Kerala, of Rojava, and the Bologna Protocol were just, I think, a snapshot of the ways in which governments are actually collaborating intensively with civil society to reframe and reimagine what governance can be and what it looks like. So from the municipal level right up to the state level, there is this experimentation with how popular movements as well as governments are envisioning a set of ideas and principles that reframe the roles and responsibilities of state and citizenry towards a more inclusive, more participatory form of government in pursuit of the common good. This becomes then the primary role of government and civil society alike. These principles taken together create a framework for imagining state and civil society as a symbiotic relationship, a partnership whose center of gravity is neither the market nor the state, but society itself, organized to perfect the practice of democracy and cooperation as the mechanisms for both personal and social well-being. The idea of the partner state is based on these principles. So the dilution of corporate power and the democratization of the economy are the vital next phase of the democratic project. Civilizing the state would complete at long last the incorporation of democracy, of the democratic principle throughout the body politic, and its confinement to the rituals of representative government. So in summary, the partner state enlarges the scope of personal agency in public life while reinforcing the social bonds that build healthy communities and a vibrant civil society. The partner state establishes the sovereignty of civil society by democratizing and decentralizing the institutions of governance. This process can begin most effectively with the democratization of the institutions and services already provided by the state, especially with respect to the provision of social care and human services. The rise and phenomenal spread of social co-ops is an example of this, but it also applies to the democratization and humanization of the economy. So if social movements are to be effective, they must go beyond protest, beyond the ephemera of occupy tactics, beyond the demonization of fellow citizens, beyond opposition to proposition. They need a language of common purpose, of identifying the underlying roots of discontent that unite us, and of articulating this discontent in political terms that offer concrete ideas for change. Above all, they need a symbolism of commonality and hope that engages both the heart and the mind. Human societies must somehow return to a sense of common belonging, to recover a sense of common purpose that reconnects people with each other and with a dying world around us. So reliance on human reason is not enough, nor is an appeal to science or facts. We require a politics of reconstruction, a politics of relationship and commonality. We need a politics whose purpose is the creation of human connectivity and solidarity. This is the ultimate task of civil society and the state in our time. We need a form of politics that makes this possible. So the question of whether this is viable as a political project, whether this kind of system change is possible given the concentration of power and wealth in a never-shrinking elite, is a question that haunts all of this. But I want to answer it by saying that in writing Civilizing the State, I make it very clear that whether these ideas and these principles of cooperative commonwealth, of a partner state, and of a sovereign civil society as the focus of political development are possible is not really the question. The question is, in other words, are they possible today? The question is, what are the ideas, what are the structures, and what are the models that actually embody the kinds of cooperative, pro-social, and civil principles that we hope to embed in the kind of world we want to live in. These examples are really kind of pinpoints of possibility that we need to look at and learn from, and basically understand that unless we have a vision of what the possibilities are and what the alternative looks like, we will never get out of the very constricted and tunnel frame of reference that we're living in at the moment. So I will leave it at that. I'm sure there's lots of questions people have to share, and I'm happy to respond to them. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. I'm going to jump the queue just to procedurally say a couple of things. Judith Harris, our fearless leader at CASC, is unfortunately afflicted with a killer laryngitis, which is why he was not able to introduce you at the beginning of our session. And we had a bit of a glitch with the waiting room, which means that I wasn't able to get in to introduce you either. So I'm not sure you were even introduced.
I don't think I was.
Luckily, you're someone who needs no introduction to wax cliche. But I guess we have 10 minutes now, so I encourage people to either put up your hands virtually or plug in your questions to the chat room, and we'll take as many questions as we can manage in the time available to us. And perhaps while we're waiting for the throng to put up their hands, I'll just ask you a quick question myself. John, you mentioned Antonio Gramsci, and
yes.
I was glad to hear that, because I think cooperators don't talk very much about Gramsci, and we would be in a better position perhaps if we did. And part of the reason I think that is because he was, of course, a journalist. And although there are cooperative daily newspapers in Athens and Rome and Montevideo and Berlin, I think that's not a sector that we've considered a priority. And so if cooperation is culturally weak, I guess I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, because it seems like we talk about economics, we talk about politics, but both of those things have to be culturally imagined first.
Absolutely. You're so right about this. But it's not just cooperatives or the cooperative movement has neglected this issue of really cultural information and education. It's the left in general. It's the labor movement as well. And so people's conceptions of the world and the political systems in which they live are hugely influenced by media, not just by newspapers, obviously, but by social media and so on. And there is so far very little in the way of an organized effort to try and reclaim some of that space, on the part of more progressive movements in society. You're quite right. There is a very successful, actually, cooperative newspaper operating in Athens, in Greece, and a number of other instances. But this whole question, I think, needs to be expanded to look at the whole area of information culture. The recent interest in platform cooperatives and ways in which online systems can be cooperativized and made more, in a sense, democratic, is a really important move into this direction. But then there are other issues, I think, underneath even that, which is, how do we contain and how do we manage the splintering and the fragmentation in society that is also being promoted, by these media, by social media in particular. I'm not sure anybody has a real answer to that, because increasingly people are living in ever shrinking and ever sort of self-reinforcing bubbles. And so this question of rebuilding community and conversation between political groupings is absolutely fundamental. And I wasn't able to address this in my talk, but a key point in civilizing the state is that perhaps the only way and the best way to rebuild bridges and some sense of commonality among different political viewpoints and worldviews is through the promotion of cooperatives that bring together people of very different political dispositions and life circumstances into a common enterprise through a cooperative movement and cooperative structure. So, for example, cooperativizing some of the public services that the state has been primarily responsible in the past, using a partner-state approach and a partnership relationship with civil society, creating democratic forms of things like healthcare, social care, other forms of human service, and so on, which bring together people that normally would have no affiliation politically or might see the world differently, but have a common interest in healthcare or social care or childcare or transportation or something like this that really unites people around a very practical way of collaborating together for things that they need for themselves and their families. So this is one area, I think, that the co-op model has such a vital role to play in terms of the kind of politics that we pursue. Sorry, that's a big roundabout answer to your question, but
it's an excellent answer, and such an excellent answer. I think you also answered Destiny's question. So unless, Destiny, you want to get in here, I see Anna as the top of the speaking list, and then we've got my old friend Hazel Corcoran on the list. So go ahead, Anna.
Gracias. Buenas tardes desde Buenos Aires, Argentina. I hope you're all doing well. I really enjoyed your talk, so thanks a lot for framing these issues. I also wanted to ask you whether or how do you deal with issues of translation, meaning not only language, but cultural translation, and the way we in different parts of the world talk about the same things. That was one issue I wanted to bring up.
Yes.
The other issue is related to language as well. I'm a social linguist in the end, so that's why. But I guess that at least in Argentina, we have been struggling with how to reframe categories that don't seem to accomplish what we need, such as state and civil society, for example. This would be a very long conversation if we got into that. But what I wanted to point out is that, for example, you said the clan would be an action of the civil society. And of course, we don't want that. We don't want the Ku Klux Klan, of course. So we're talking about something different. So in order, at least here in our team, to sort of avoid that type of confusion that using civil society may bring, we started to use the terms that people are using themselves, or we are using because we do collaborative research. But again, for example, in this case, we talk about asamblea o proceso asambleario. We go straight ahead and use that term.
Oh, yes.
I don't want to be long here because I know there's lots of people who want to talk. So just those issues that brought my attention, and thanks again. I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
You're up,
Hazel.
Hazel.
Thank you. I was waiting to see if John wanted to respond. Yeah, thanks, John. I want to say I thought your analysis was just wonderful and spot on, and I appreciate the hopefulness in terms of bringing out what you have in those spaces around the world where these partner state approaches are working with the cooperative model as a central piece and really focus on society. I guess I really was struck by, toward the beginning, you were focusing on not only the various kinds of political and economic values and so on, but also you brought out the spiritual values. And of course, you look around faith-based communities, there's also various kinds of crises and decline, but I think there's also potential for partnering and could you speak a little bit more about what you have in mind
Yeah.
there? Thank you.
Yeah, I would. In fact, it's part of my talk, but I just didn't have enough time to get into it. But I do believe that there is a huge issue and a neglected issue among progressive movements around the spiritual dimensions of political work and of social change work. And I mentioned that, questions of the common good are ultimately, I think, spiritual questions. They move beyond, they take politics beyond simply ends and means for particular political programs or political policies. They address what I think is also driving the unrest globally, which is the absence of meaning in public life and in politics. And there is this absolute sort of, I think, need to recapture the ways in which politics, in the sense in which Aristotle used to use the term, that politics is the way in which communities organize their collective life for the common good. And so I think introducing the question of the common good as something that applies to the whole of a society, not just to a privileged elite, is fundamentally a spiritual question and reinvests or reinserts the spiritual dimension into political life. I also sort of point out that politics, the way we normally conceive of it, when it relies on competition and the pursuit of political power per se, is actually extraordinarily divisive and polarizes or exacerbates the polarization and divisions within society. I think what cooperation, mutual benefit, and the common good brings into the picture is a form of politics where the spiritual task of politics is to identify what unites people in terms of a common benefit, and then developing institutions that reinforce the bonds between individuals, such as supporting social and solidarity economy organizations, supporting cooperative forms of institutional organization and governance, supporting local forms of direct democratic decision-making. These are strategies that I believe build community, build a sense of commonality and the common good among people that participate in them, and ultimately constitute a spiritual dimension of politics that aims to unite people around common benefit and common good, which is very different than the kind of politics that we see playing out around us. What Aristotle referred to was a need not just for political change, in which one group achieves political power, but social change, social regime change, which means altering the social relationships and the ways in which people connect to each other around addressing, discussing, and pursuing common interests. And that is the task, I believe, of social movements and of the state. And that is what I think the partner state has to take on as a fundamental focus for its work.
John, I see we've run down the clock. We've got 1 minute left. So let me quickly just thank you very much for your time and your encouraging words. I know we all feel a little better now than we did at the beginning of the session. So thank you for that. Encouragement is in scarce supply, I think, these days. So we value it. I also want to quickly just say thank you to the organizers. Events don't organize themselves, and it takes a lot of hard work. So congratulations to all of the CASC organizing team members, and thank you to our tech support for helping to make this happen. And please stay tuned for the next session, which is Changing the Narrative, International Perspectives on Reshaping a Just Recovery for All. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Thanks for the invitation. I really enjoyed it.